In this panel, it's going to be reflecting on fast fashion. And fast fashion, I don't know if it's mentioned today at all. I think it was. Yeah, on the Kahoot. We mentioned fast fashion on the Kahoot. So, but it's not talked about often enough. I feel like fast fashion continues to be something that systems that we don't consider enough in environmental policy and environmental justice communities and just in health in general and the way that it impacts our environments and our communities. So today we're going to be doing a reflection on how our consumption patterns, specifically the ones that are systematically placed upon us, guide and sometimes influence the ways in which we consume fashion and in which ways we consume clothes. So with this fabulous panel that I have here with me today, that was a cheers. Thank you, Mel. We'll just do intros really quickly, name, pronouns, organization, and role. I'm Chris. Nice to see you all again. NJEJA. And?
My name is Chloe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the environmental justice organizer with Ironbound Community Corporation. Nice to see y'all.
Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm a fashion writer and researcher.
Hi everyone, I'm Mallory, she, her pronouns, and I'm a graduate student at Columbia.
Ooh. So as you can see, there's two different worlds here in a way. You have like the EJ perspective and you have like the researcher and professional perspective on fashion. So we thought bringing these two worlds together today would be really interesting to like engage in how we can think about and reflect on our choices. So we'll start this with asking a simple question. What is your connection to fashion?
Oh, you want me to start?
Yeah.
My connection to fashion, I mean, I feel like for me, it's been my way to express myself. As you can see. Oh, thank you. But honestly, I feel like it has always been a sense of expression for me, like how I'm feeling, like how I want to present myself in any type of space, or just what I feel like giving today. And today I wanted to just give, period.
Ooh. Okay. It's hard to follow that. I guess, well, fashion has always been my career, so I started, my first job was, of course, at the mall and at 17 at Bloomingdale's folding sweaters, and I've pretty much worked in the industry in almost every capacity from magazines and e-commerce, retail, going to buying meetings, just running around the city with garment bags, basically. So, you know, you kind of get to see the industry in its full scope. But over the last couple of years, I've been exploring it more, you know, from this environmental perspective and its impact and how it fits into the broader goal of, you know, trying to work to, you know, not all disappear from climate change. And, you know, it really interconnects with so many different industries in the ways that we don't always think about on the regular basis, like agriculture, you know, shipping, logistics, trucking, you know, just so many, retail, of course, and it's just integrated in our economy in so many ways, plastics, and so, yeah, we're just trying to learn how to improve that.
Great answers from everyone. I think, for me personally, fashion is obviously an important part of self-expression. Everyone can relate to that. It's the way you present yourself to the world. For me personally, in recent years, the more I have researched into the impact of the fashion industry in particular, I think that has shifted, and it is now a way for me to understand the impact of my clothing, to try and make more conscious choices on it, and it's a form of being able to be really aware of how I'm choosing to express myself. So whether that's choosing secondhand clothing or sharing with family and friends. So I think that that has been the shift in recent years, the more that I have looked into the fashion industry as a whole.
Thank you. So for me, my connection to fashion is similar to what folks have said into understanding it as a form of self-expression. I present femme now, and I used to not present femme, so shifting that transition from masculine clothes to feminine clothes validated me a lot, and fashion became that way of validation and affirmation for my identity. So for me, it's been a journey of self-expression and like learning about myself and understanding that, but also keeping in mind how these clothes and the ways that they're manufactured have a larger impact outside of just myself. So yes, like I'm getting self-expressed, but also we are polluting the planet. So I think it's really important to keep those nuances in mind, and there are contradictions. You know, it's not something that we can necessarily fix right away. But for me personally, I've learned to live with those contradictions and do the best that I can in supporting myself and to expressing myself in a way that is authentic to me. So yeah, and thinking about how we connect with fashion, I think something that I always think about is the way that we don't get to choose how most of our clothes get made, and how some of them, there's a lot of systemic issues at hand that play a larger role in the ways that we consume. So there is a lot of pressure to kind of buy ethically, and I think there is, it's a really interesting thing to do because we can definitely, I know that folks here have a lot of perspectives on that, but yeah, so buying ethically, how does that feel? Like, is it possible? Is it something that we can do? What is ethical at this point? Mallory, go first.
Okay, I can go first. I think this is a really important aspect to start off with, because there is this myth of the ethical consumer or being the perfect consumer and how you can aid in that. So like, for example, I was just talking about thrifting and all those things. It's this idea that you have to be perfect in this. But the reality is the impact happens way before you purchase the clothes and way after. It's in the production, it's in the emissions, it's in the incineration, the disposal, and the landfill. So a lot of that idea of putting the pressure on the individual and the consumer to be the ones bearing that burden is disproportionate in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of the conversation has shifted in recent years to try and place that burden more on the brands themselves, more on the manufacturing process, the disposal process. And I think that is an important shift, especially I think we'll go more into talk about what potential solutions are, what ethical systems might be. But I think that shift in conversation is very important. It's still important to have a conscious decision and to try and not overconsume and to think about what you're purchasing, but at the same time, it's equally as important to try and find ways to create actual change. And a lot of times that's not through what you buy every day at the store.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's important to remember that the clothing industry and the supply chain that goes into making clothes is a very expansive global industry. And so even one garment that you wear, the zipper could be made in one country, it could be dyed in another country. If it's leather, the cow maybe grew up in another country. It's so expansive, and all of those manufacturing processes are operating under different governments with different regulations and different standards. And so it's very challenging, one, to regulate it and to apply any kind of standard equally and ethically to everyone, especially when you're dealing with some places where people are not permitted to really have a vote. And so it is hard to, like we say, shop ethically, but I think as in America, collectively, we are the top consuming country in the world. And so most countries are making things on our behalf. And so it's just important to remember that where we can, to try to consider, some of our habits and what we can do. Maybe we can find other hobbies when we're bored and things like that. But it is hard at the moment to really buy something that you might consider fully ethical.
I feel like an important thing to definitely bring out in this question of what is ethical consumption is that there is no such thing, in parentheses, under capitalism. I feel like it's important to mention that because then you realize that there's no such thing as that when your producer prioritizes profit instead of anything else, which is why greenwashing is such a big, rampant issue. And looking at our products that we have now where they're like, oh, this is recycled, and like it's 90% polyester. And the most accessible thing that we have and the cheapest thing that people can afford is polyester right now, right? So then it goes into also considering how much we're consuming as well, like especially in the digital age and the influencing age where you can go on a social media app and you have a tab to shop. Very difficult to move past that sometimes.
And that's an interesting dynamic that I think happens, the role that social media has played in our consumption patterns might differ by age group, because I feel like there is a larger presence of like Zoomers, Gen Zers in social media as opposed to older generations. Yes, I call y'all Zoomers. There's a larger presence of younger folks in social media as opposed to older folks, so there is, it feels almost like they're predators looking to get folks to kind of, like, folks that are vulnerable too, that are just learning about life and learning about that, probably don't know what the impact is on these things. And that, and the whole thing about influencing and how social media has played a role, something that I heard recently, and I would like for y'all to explain that more, because I don't be knowing. De-influencing, what is that, and what role can it play in the future, and how do we even get here? Why do we have to de-influence?
Well, actually, I feel like it's a new concept that I've been learning myself. I associate it with unlearning. Because when you're de-influencing everything that's been brought up in you, because, I mean, one of the things that we do is just consume all the time. So we're like, oh my gosh, what's in right now? A particular brand or a particular style. And that's how influencers are able to sell those things to us. And the next thing you know, we're just following trends instead of following what we like. I think that when you're more intentional with what you wear and you're like, okay, this is something that I genuinely want to like rock out, it's easier to keep it and hold on to it and have many wears with it as opposed to when it's the end of the trend cycle. But yeah.
You guys there, okay?
Ooh.
Yeah.
I'll just have one thing I have to do.
We're just gonna turn it off. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a newer concept, but I also think part of de-influencing, I mean, I think before social media ever was around, you know, people have always wanted to fit in with their immediate community, wherever that may be. And actually, you know, there's a lot of talk about chemicals and the chemistry industry today, and actually the chemistry industry kind of came about because of a fashion trend ultimately. I mean, it was started kind of as a niche science in England, and they were trying to cure malaria, and so by accident, as the result of those experiments, someone discovered, a young kid discovered how to make a synthetic version of the color purple, and it just went wild, and it kind of exploded the chemical industry. And so that's why a lot of people's waterways were pink and purple. And, you know, and there's a book I would recommend you look into called Tom's River, based on the story of New Jersey, about what happened when some of those chemical companies, as you well know, from the dye industry, came to New Jersey. So anyway, but yeah, I think de-influencing is also about, you know, yes, we all want to fit in with our friends and our community, but also learning yourself and looking after your own mental health and not feeling like you're not of value if you don't wear every single thing that you see on the internet. And I think a lot about, you know, there's, I think, a little bit of a difference between having style and being trendy. And having style is kind of, I've been lucky to visit many countries, and when you see stylish people on the street, it's not that they're wearing the latest thing, it's just that they look like they didn't try hard at all. They just got up and they have this look about them. They have this style that they've developed over the course of years, with probably wearing some of the same things that they've worn over the course of those years, and just kind of building a wardrobe that you gradually, add to and sometimes let go of. But I think we're kind of becoming a society where we're not thinking very long term, and a lot of our items, we're trying to change our whole look every season, and that's just not sustainable. So.
Yeah, everyone's made great points. I think that de-influencing in particular, I think you're right, has come about in the age of social media, and I think it is a lot in response to this really rapid increase of the fashion cycle that we have seen in recent years. So when you have fast fashion brands like Shein putting these influencers on TikTok, and they have hundreds of clothing, and they're doing a Shein haul, and it's promoting this idea that you need to buy, all these new items and for every event, and you need to continue to consume in order to be trendy or to be stylish. So I think that we're seeing this de-influencing trend as a response to that. And I think it's really important, like you said, to consider your personal style, what feels good to you, what feels good on your body, what you're comfortable in. And I think that it is really important to consider those, especially when you're getting this always in your face advertisements and always urging you to buy and buy more, so.
And could you, something that you mentioned was Shein hauls, and that's something new that I learned, hauling. Yeah. Who here knows what hauling is? I see one hand up. Oh, okay.
We got it.
Couple of y'all know, wait, what was it called? It's a haul, right? Yeah.
It's a haul.
Okay, I just learned about that a few days ago, and if y'all want to explain it a little bit.
Yeah, I guess for anyone who doesn't know, haul is when a lot of times a brand will send an influencer, or I guess it could be anyone, if you purchase your own clothing too, but it's usually when you buy a lot at once and you just show off what you've bought. And it's kind of, a lot of times it can be like get ready with me's or things like that can play into it as well. But it's a sort of, I guess, social media trend in a way, if anyone has anything else to add.
I just want to add that another reason, I guess, to consider your consumption and consider perhaps de-influencing is just that, there's a ton of natural resources that go into making clothing. So trees, obviously a lot of animal products, a lot of water is used to grow cotton, for example. In certain states, they're having a lot of drought issues as a result of some of that. And so it's just, and of course all the chemicals and all the plastics. So it's just, just as we've discussed the challenges with recycling today, there are exponentially more challenges with trying to recycle clothing. And so it's just important that, we just try to consider a little bit more before we create more demand for them to make new things.
You want to add to that about hauling? Go ahead.
I don't haul. I feel like hauling has been something where like people, because the clothes are so cheap, it's so much easier to buy more of it instead of being able to take quality pieces and invest in those to make out of your wardrobe. Because at the end of the day, like if you buy 50 shirts or 10 shirts or whatever the case may be, are you wearing all those shirts? You're gonna end up giving them away eventually, and then it ends up in a landfill somewhere, which is why we're all here right now. Waste justice.
Say that. So hauling is a very interesting concept to me, and it's also something that feels very classist in a way, because it seems like it's a lot of folks that have a lot of disposable income that can go ahead and have these fashion hauls and just like show off like what they are doing to folks that probably don't have the same disposable income to do the same things, which is not a bad thing. Because they're not. Imagine if we all had disposable income and we were all doing hauling. So thank you for explaining that. And I wanted us to also touch on the impacts of our consumption patterns and our fashion clothes For example, I also just learned that the clothes you donate to the thrift stores, the ones that they didn't take, they get rid of them. And if anybody would like to share where they go. Yeah.
Sure. So, first of all, because of fast fashion as one, and because of just the cycle of turnover, shops and organizations like the Salvation Army that were set up to collect donated clothing, there's just no way on earth that they can handle the volume of what they receive. And so, they do their best. They have to sit and sort through all these things and try to find out what's worth it for them to resell. And also, for a while we were shipping a lot of things overseas. I think particularly China has canceled a lot of that. And so, but they're still ending up overseas or, somewhere where those countries also cannot deal with the magnitude of what they receive. And so a lot of it is burned. So I guess it's just, it's just another important thing to consider. I lost my train of thought of what I was going to say.
Yeah, I can add on to that. So I think that this idea of donations was one of the most shocking things that I found out about the fashion industry. I think what I have found out basically is the majority of what you donate, like you said, the volume is just too enormous for most thrift or any of these sort of secondhand apparel shops to handle. So a lot of times those wind up getting sold to secondhand markets and, like you said, overseas in different countries. But even there, there's secondhand markets that exist there, but because of fast fashion, the increasing on the outputs that we've seen, those markets are now being overwhelmed. So that is increasing the waste that they have to deal with. And now that is leading to a lot of landfills happening in deserts where clothes are being burnt. And it's also, not to bring in like the fast fashion companies again, but the quality of the clothes have also gone down significantly. And that is impacting those markets which might have once had higher quality clothes and better business. So the impact of our clothing, a lot of us, I think, have this idea that, I could just buy this and then I donate it and it's fine and it's great and I did the right thing. But I was very shocked to find out that that is not always what happens. So it's important, again, when we're talking about thinking about our own and reflecting about our own consumption patterns to really have the full view of what happens in the entirety of the system. So, yes.
Sorry, I remembered what I was going to say. No, just I think it's important to remember that, certain of our things that have been, like paper, for example, we've had a long-standing tradition and infrastructure to recycle paper. And when we think of when we're finished with paper, we don't think about donating it, right? We think, well, we're going to recycle it, and there's someone to collect that, and there's someone to, shred it back up and make it into new paper. With clothing, there is no system for that currently in place. There really isn't a set infrastructure either for collection or sorting or potentially recycling materials. So a lot of it's handled either by a few private businesses or by these charitable organizations. But another important thing to note is that, recycling at the end of the day is a business. And they, in order to run that business, sure, they might take some, they might have a good contract with the city or to operate, but they also have to, be able to pay their operating expenses at the end of the day. And that's the same with clothing. And so by the time clothing companies are receiving, even the ones like ThredUp and the RealReal and companies like that are trying to do, resale and extend the life of some of these clothing, the clothing waste, when they're receiving items that sold originally for $10, by the time they get that item, sort through it, make sure it's, do quality check, re-photograph it, they have to do the measurements, all this logistics that they have to do, how they're going to have to sell it for more than that $10 that the new one was sold at. So they can't compete with that. So it's not like a great business model. And so that's part of the other reason why that the clothing has to be made better quality and with the intention of longevity over just something that you're going to wear a few times. It has to be able to hold up in the wash. It has to be able to be repaired. It has to be able to be passed on to someone else, if we can, because that infrastructure just isn't there. And by the way, the infrastructure that might be coming in order to handle that is going to be more of what was discussed today, chemical recycling, and the same challenges that have been brought up many times today.
Yeah, who here knows what chemical recycling is? Were we paying attention?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good job. Yeah, so that was interesting to me to learn too, that chemical recycling was not just a plastics related issue, but also something in the fashion industry.
Do you want to know why?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the main challenges with recycling clothing is that all of our clothes are it's not only that they're plastic, but it's that they're blended plastic. So most of our clothing, even a cotton shirt, like my shirt is cotton today, my sweater, but it also has at least 9 percentage points of spandex or elastane. So this fabric, if it were going to be mechanically recycled, it would technically be contaminated because of the spandex. And the spandex plays a function. It actually plays a function in the durability of the garment. And so the reason that they blend materials in the first place is to partially extend their longevity and for them to serve a better function for us. So polyester and cotton being the most common blend, those two materials function very well together and they balance out each other's weaknesses, but it also makes trying to recycle those materials in a way where you can actually spin new fiber and create a new garment again very challenging. And so the way that they're finding in order to separate those fibers is through chemical recycling.
I mean, I can't really contribute much to the sadness here, aside from the fact that I see a lot of parallels in the work that we do now. Like, since you already had brought up chemical recycling, like, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, like, wow, like, these are similar in the sense of, like, how we consume plastic on the regular, Like, when we have our plastic bottles, when we have, like, bottles that we are reusing that are still plastic, like, we still have to go through the decision of whether or not we can repurpose it as a vase or let it burn tomorrow. And that's definitely a complex situation in itself.
But that's what we were reflecting here today, about having these understandings of these issues, which they all sound like system issues. They don't sound like individual issues, and it sounds like there's a larger role here being played by corporations in the way that they are designing and controlling the way that we are consuming. And that brings us to kind of thinking about what might an ethical fashion system look like? Like, what would it be composed of? What do we need to even have one? Can we get there?
Well, do you want to?
We all have thoughts.
I think one thing that, the fashion industry kind of reflects the way it is right now. The companies that are doing well are the companies at the very, very top and the very, very bottom. And why is that the case? Because there's a lot of inequality in our, in our society. And so people can either only afford the very, very bottom, or, there's people buying up, all those luxury companies did not hurt during the pandemic, I promise. They were very profitable somehow. So, and another important thing to remember about that is that on the high end, a lot of these companies are becoming monopolies. So most of the luxury brands that you've ever heard of are run by maybe 1 or 2 parent companies. And when that happens, they control the supply, they control the price, they control what countries are going to make it and what countries don't. I was lucky enough to interview someone from the United Nations at one point, and I asked her who's involved in her work was involved in setting the Sustainable Development Goals, which is what a lot of, all of sustainability is based on. All countries are trying to meet these sustainable development goals, and we're all very behind, of course. But I asked her, it's great that the countries are trying to collaborate, I guess, and set these goals, but do you engage with the companies, because they're almost more powerful than individual countries? So, and that's the case in the fashion industry, where you have the very high end controlling a lot of the market, and then the challenge with these very low end fast fashion companies coming in at just continually lower and lower prices is that they are creating more of an economic disparity. There's very few small businesses that can keep up with those prices, with offering free shipping and returns. Most companies cannot do what's called reverse logistics in an economical fashion. It's very hard to accept all these shipments back and resell the items again. And most companies just don't have the resources to invest in that anyway. So when those companies come in and they're large companies and they're setting just rock bottom prices of dresses for $10. I saw a wedding dress for like 12, it's no one can compete with that. And so no one can make, how are you gonna pay wages fairly with that? How are you gonna, make something out of a decent material with that? How are you gonna dye something with a more expensive dye that's not using all the chemicals competing with that? You won't. And so part of it is just, having the discussion, and for people, I think everyone's, it's challenging times with the economy, with, we're still battling inflation, but I think for anyone who out there who maybe their economic tax bracket might change one day, or just for anyone who hears it who has disposable income, to try to make, different choices, I think is important.
I'll try and keep my answer brief because I think everyone has a lot of thoughts on this. I think that the idea of an ethical system is a hard question because there's so many things at play, so many different aspects of this industry, and we've only touched on a very little amount of it at this point. But if I were to highlight just two things I think are important, I would think that some sort of centralized regulation would be important. As you mentioned, focused on the brands is a really important aspect that can be developed. And we've seen that a little bit in recent years. Some new regulations are coming out. The New York Fashion Act was proposed recently, which is seeking to tackle the environmental and social impacts of the fashion industry. We've seen the California Garment Workers Protection Act. So there are some efforts on the regulation end. So I think some sort of centralized regulation could tackle and hold brands accountable for their role in all of this. And the other side of things, I think we've talked about it a few times now, but the overall reduction of production of clothing needs to happen because it's unsustainable, the output that we're maintaining right now, especially with the fast fashion brands and just in general over the entirety of the system. So I think that in itself, without a reduction and a slowing of the fashion cycle, we're not going to see a lot of changes, or it would be then at that point impossible to create an ethical system. So those are what I would highlight as two important factors amongst many.
Yeah, I'm also drawing parallels here because I feel like I am talking about the same things, but just in a different topic. And it just feels like there's similar system issues that just keep replicating themselves over and over again. And this, when you were talking about regulations and how you were mentioning like the different ways that the textiles are made and combined, I was just literally thinking about EPR. Because like for folks that know EPR, extended producer responsibility, that serves as a tool to hold corporations accountable in their manufacturing processes so that the products that are being produced are actually ethical. They could stay within the circular system so they're not having externalities that could harm communities, people, or the environment. So I think having EPR for fashion and clothing could be beneficial to ensure that the products that are being produced and the clothes that are being produced, they're not combined with different kinds of chemicals. So for example, the extended producer responsibility bill here that we're trying to work in Jersey, one of the caveats or like one of the loopholes that we're trying to close in that is making sure that there's a list of chemicals that are allowed. So the plastic industry uses like so many different chemicals. And that's why it's hard for the plastics to get recycled. But if they kept it to specific ones, then the plastics would be easier to recycle. But they don't do that because it's expensive and it's cheaper to just create cheap products. So I think having something that could control that, and especially like have manufacturers being the ones that control that and making sure that there's a circularity aspect to each product that they have will really help us into ensuring that their ethical systems could come into place.
I mean, I was gonna say the same thing in terms of parallels. Like, I'm thinking about making sure that we keep the blame away from the individual person, because it's not our fault that we're being given these options, right? I feel like for me, I don't know if it's gonna answer the question directly, but when I'm listening to y'all and hearing the question, after moving past individual blame, I'm like, okay, how can I continue to be intentional about how I'm moving in the space, like how I'm moving in that and how I'm contributing to it myself? Because for me, I mean, I went from having scarce like resources of knowing where to buy into having so many options and being able to like be easily influenced by all these people telling me, oh, you should buy this and you should buy that. But now I keep on thinking about this one place that I was at where they had to tell you, like, you know what, just remind yourself that you have enough. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, I have enough.
You are enough.
And I am enough.
That's right.
Thank you. Period. Yes. But once I realized that, I'm like, okay, I'm going on a trip. I don't need to go shopping. I have enough in my closet. Things like that.
Yeah. And I feel like that's part of like how we've been trained to consume too. Like we've been trained to consume and consume and consume as things go. I just really quickly wanted to bring it up to the audience and ask folks if anybody had an idea of what an ethical fashion system should look like, or some key components that it should have. Yes, JB. Oh, I see 2 hands, yes.
Now, there's so much coming up. Thank you for this super interesting conversation. I was thinking about, like, here locally, like Elizabeth and Newark share a huge port system, one of the largest port systems on the East Coast, and probably everything that everyone is wearing is coming in from that port system. So I'm sure that's part of like this responsibility of consumption and production at the same time. So I'm actually cheating. I want to ask a question. So ethically, I don't know. Like, one thing that we've thought about doing in community is doing like mending workshops, so that we're trying to prolong the life of our clothing and like learning how to not think of it as like something's wrong with it, so it has to go. But if it's okay to ask a question, I was at Target, because I'm just as guilty as anybody else. And I saw on like children's clothing that I think was like mostly 100% polyester or rayon, that it said like keep away from open flames. So I don't know if anyone has like research or something on just like the impact of the things that we wear too. Because I think of skincare as like going into our skin, the things we eat as like microplastics and all these other things. But with textiles, like, is that also something that, because of what it's made out of, that it's like impacting us too?
Well, yes, there's a lot of chemicals that go into making clothing for a variety of sources. So some may be, which probably won't impact you as much as the consumer, but some may be in the manufacturing itself. So you mentioned rayon. Rayon is actually made from wood, and obviously to get wood to become a pulp and then a fiber, sometimes it depends. Sometimes it can go through a very chemically intensive process, and in that process it is it can be very dangerous for the people who are performing that process in the manufacturing. But also our clothing is dyed and finished with all kinds of chemicals, and the finishings have a variety of purposes. Sometimes they're for, so that they can be more stain resistant, or so that they can wrinkle less often. But also, I'm not sure exactly what. I mean, some materials like nylon or some of the plastic materials, they're probably just more sensitive to heat, and so that's why I'm not sure exactly in particular what would be flammable, but that's why you have to be careful about what you put in the dryer, because if some of them could melt, it's just plastic. But I think for an example, one of the big chemicals that groups, or at least some of them in that group that is probably on your banned list, is the PFAS forever chemicals. And so I've been trying to find out what are potential alternatives to PFAS forever chemicals in clothing. And for many of you who aren't familiar, in the application of clothing, those forever chemicals are used to make things waterproof and water resistant. And so obviously that's an important function, because especially for people who work outside, people in the military, just, anybody who works outside, or even just for your leisure, people who do outdoors things. Obviously, if you spend a significant amount of money on a performance jacket, you want it to be waterproof, or what it says it's going to do. But the challenge that I've been learning from interviewing a couple of different scientists who are not connected to any company, they work just for universities here and in Canada, and one in Australia, is that there isn't an alternative right now, and they've been studying it for 10 years, and there isn't a chemical alternative that is going to replicate that purpose. And so one of the alternatives that they're trying is to coat it with more plastic. So because now the EPA has finally banned PFAS is a very large group of chemicals, but they've banned the most significant ones, and I think they're continuing to ban a few more. And I think New York and New Jersey also and California are playing a role in banning them, but I think the EPA has finally across the board now banned them, because those chemicals stay forever, and you don't even need to wash those chemicals for them to. One of the scientists told me that even just wearing it, the molecules just shed off.
That's like PM 2.5.
Right. So yeah. So
that's like PM 2.5.
So it's just, but we need to not use them anymore. Obviously clothing isn't the only culprit. They were used a lot in things like firefighting foam and things that unfortunately have important functions, but there aren't really great alternatives. And if you look closely on websites like Patagonia and those companies that sell those outdoor, they'll start to tell you that, to say hey, we're trying to find alternatives. We don't really have a great one yet, so you got to bear with us. And a few of the different coatings that I see are either maybe silicone or polyethylene, which is a type of plastic as a replacement. But yes, and also clothing dyes can be, and also what leather is tanned with, especially very inexpensive synthetic leathers, a lot of chemicals.
Thank you. Carly, you had a question? Yeah. And then we can take one more question before we go on breakouts.
I didn't really have a question, but I guess I was just going to answer what I thought. I guess maybe would be a more ethical system. And I think just this past weekend with Black Friday, Cyber Monday, all of these different sales that were going on, I just was hearing my family during the holidays just brag about all the deals they got, about their consumption. And I think we've just been conditioned for especially living in this country to try and get the best bang for our buck. And I think the problem right now is that for some reason, for exploitative reasons, a lot of like production somehow is cheaper to go into another country, get on a boat, go through all these processes, chemical compounds and things to create a shirt that would somehow comes out to be like $2 on Shein or something, versus, you know, going across the street maybe to somebody who made their clothes from hand, and how come that shirt is like $80. So I think right now our production is giving more incentivization to exploit people, and rather than charging them more for doing such things, charging people more for having these large shipments and utilizing a lot of resources for very minimal pay for other countries and other people. So I think, yeah, I guess that's what I guess what I'm trying to say is that the incentivization of exploiting people is somehow bringing more profit, and then we are being conditioned to be proud of that. Oh, I only got this for this much. Like those hauls, oh, I only spent $100, but I got like 3,000 things. So yeah, I think right now we just aren't matching our consumption to what should be ethical at this point. But.
Well, there is one federal law that might be able to help with that. Over the last couple of years, Congress added something called the de minimis exception. Has anyone ever heard of that? Yes? Has anyone ever heard of drop shipping? People have heard of drop shipping? So drop shipping is basically how companies like Shein operate. So, you know, we're here, we might think of, oh, we have like, you know, I'm from New York City, I work for department stores. A department store, you know, will go to the vendor and select things and, you know, be like the intermediary between the customer and the brand. But with companies like Shein, they have literally hundreds of little factories that they can't oversee, so there's no oversight on the conditions, there's no oversight on the safety, there's no oversight on the quality, there's no oversight on what chemicals or materials they might be using, there's just no oversight on anything. And then because of this loophole in one of our trade laws, they can just send up to $800 worth of goods directly to an individual without having to pay duties and tariffs. And so you can call your congressperson to see if they can amend that so that it's not cheaper to get goods from overseas than from like California.
Yeah, so the fashion world seems a little messy, huh? It helps us a lot, but it's just very messy.